Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Michael Small, and today we're actually talking about the parable of the prodigal son. You can find the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 32. In this passage, Jesus tells the story of a man and his two sons dealing with the inheritance, where the younger son wastes his inheritance on rioters living. Not much that is different from a lot of our stories, as we grow up. I have to say that life can feel like a traveler who leaves home with a full tank of gas, but no map. At first, the road feels exciting and adventurous, and there's freedom and there's independence, but eventually that excitement kind of fades. The road becomes lonely, especially if you're driving by yourself. The fuel runs low, and somehow along the way, we realize that we have lost our way. The story of the prodigal son is exactly that journey, the human journey of that's leaving our spiritual center and finding our way back home. A young man asks his father for his inheritance early, and he wants freedom and independence. And I know what that's like, leaving home at an early age. However, he leaves home and spends everything on reckless living. He indulges in pleasures and making mistakes and squanders his wealth. And eventually a famine comes across that land and he finds himself hungry and not able to pay his bills. The prodigal son is a little different in the Gospel of Peace, the Essene Gospel of Peace. And if you haven't read it, it's a wonderful read. Because along that line, we all make mistakes and sometimes we don't pay our bills and we squander all of that. And then things happen. Unfortunately for this young man, a famine happens and he finds himself hungry. Even the very swine look good for him. And it's not kosher to eat pigs, but he's desperate. And that desperation makes him want to go back home. And so in that moment of desperation, he comes to himself. And I really emphasize coming to himself. And think about that for a minute. Because he remembers home, remembers who he is, and decided to return. And he's still far away yet, but his father sees him and goes running to him and tells the servant to come and give him fresh linen and put rings on his fingers and rings on his toes. For my son was dead and now he's alive. So we need to prepare a feast. Meanwhile, the older brother is angry and he calls for one of the servants. And the servant tells him about his brother's return. And he goes to his father and says, I've been loyal to you, never left your side, and I never got a celebration for me or my friends. And the father raises his hand and says, Son, you've always been with me. Your brother was lost and now he's found. Think about that for a minute. Metaphysically, in a metaphysical perspective, the Father means divine love, our creator, our source energy. That Son is that human soul that craves that freedom, but wanting to be loved. That faraway country is the separation from spiritual truth. And that famine is that spiritual emptiness that we all feel. Coming to oneself is that awakening. And returning home is that spiritual transformation. The key moments of that awakening, that moment of the son that came to himself, that awakening that we all go through. And Eric Butterworth said that, remember, you're not here to come or get something from God. You're here to realize who you really are. The son never stops being the son, and he only needs to remember who he truly was. And think about that in modern life. How can we compare that to modern life? We all wander from God, whether it's through addiction, whether it's shame, broken relationships, fear, even trauma. The story reminds us that no matter how far we wander, the path home is always open. That's something my men's group and I were talking about today. And finding that treasure, we're looking outside of ourselves to look for that treasure, but all the time it was right here. That's the spiritual journey that we all go on. But think about that. It's not punishment to come back to yourself, to remember who we are. For me, that prodigal son is not just a story from the Bible. I see myself in him. There are times that I wandered far away from who I truly was, and I searched outside myself for approval, to be accepted, to find that love, to find escape from all the pain that I was dealing with, for something I thought I was missing. But all the time, I eventually had to come back to myself. Coming back home doesn't mean returning to a place. It means coming home to myself. It means realizing that my spirit, my worth, my connection of God were still there right where I left them. And then realization came to my recovery. That became my recovery story. It's why I work in counseling and recovery, because I know what it feels like to wander far from God and know what it feels like to come back home. You see, that's the good news. The good news in this parable, no matter how far we wander, we can always return home. That moment we come to ourselves, we begin to see a journey home. So I leave you with this. You are never lost. You only need to remember who you truly are. And I know I was never lost. I only need to remember who I truly was. And let's repeat that. I know I was never lost. I only need to remember who I truly am. Say it again. I know I was never lost. I only need to remember who I truly am. One more time. I know I was never lost. I only need to remember who I truly am. Thank you very much, and namaste.